Before this story pulls you in, do me one small favor. If you believe kindness still matters in this world, tap like, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me until the very end, because what begins as a desperate night for a poor single father turns into a miracle no one saw coming. It was raining, the kind of rain that feels personal, heavy drops slamming into cracked sidewalks like the sky itself was angry. Mark Harris was already late. Late for picking up his son from the neighbor, late on rent, late on hope. He pedaled his rusted bicycle through the storm, his jacket torn at the sleeve, his thoughts fixed on how he'd stretch a can of soup into dinner again. Then he saw something that made him slam the brakes so hard he nearly flew forward. A girl lay collapsed near the bus stop, her pale dress soaked, her breathing shallow, her lips trembling as if whispering goodbye to the world. People had walked past. Some slowed. Some looked away. Mark didn't. He dropped his bike and ran to her, kneeling in the water. She couldn't have been older than 17. Her skin was ice cold. He shook her gently, calling out, but her eyes barely fluttered. Mark had no phone with data, no car, no money for an ambulance he feared he couldn't afford. Still, he lifted her into his arms, ignoring the pain shooting through his back, and began running toward the small clinic 6 blocks away, praying his legs wouldn't give out before her heart did. Every step felt like a lifetime. His lungs burned. His mind screamed that this was impossible. But then he remembered his wife's last night in the hospital, how she'd squeezed his hand and begged him never to let their son grow up in a world where people stopped caring. That memory pushed him forward. When he burst into the clinic, drenched and shaking, the nurses rushed the girl away. Only then did Mark collapse into a chair, hands covered in her blood, whispering, "Please live." Hours passed. Dawn crept in quietly. A doctor finally approached him, asking questions Mark couldn't fully answer. He didn't know her name. He didn't know where she came from. He just knew he found her dying and couldn't leave her there. The doctor nodded slowly, a look of respect crossing his face. "You saved her life," he said. Another 10 minutes, and she wouldn't have made it. Mark left before she woke up. He didn't wait for thanks. He didn't even leave his name. He rode back into the city, soaked, exhausted, heart strangely light. By the time he picked up his son, Ethan, the rain had stopped. Ethan hugged him tight and asked why his clothes smelled like a hospital. Mark just smiled and said, "Sometimes the world needs you when you least expect it." Days later, the city exploded with news. A billionaire's daughter, missing for 24 hours, had been found alive after collapsing from complications related to a chronic illness. Her name was Lily Monroe. The same Lily whose face was now on every screen, whose father-owned companies Mark had only seen logos of on billboards. Mark watched the news from the corner of a cafe window he passed on his delivery route, never imagining the girl on the screen was the same one he'd carried through the rain. At the Monroe estate, Lily lay in a room larger than Mark's entire apartment, machines humming softly beside her. Her father, Richard Monroe, sat at her bedside, his powerful hands trembling as he brushed her hair back. "You said someone saved you," he whispered. Lily nodded weakly. "He didn't know who I was," she said. "He just cared. He ran with me. I could feel his heart pounding. He kept saying, 'Stay with me.'" Richard Monroe was a man who could buy anything, but not peace. For the first time, money felt useless. He launched a citywide search, not for headlines, but for gratitude. Weeks passed before a nurse remembered a soaked man who'd waited all night without complaint. That small detail led them to Mark. When Mark opened the door to his apartment and saw suited men standing in the hallway, he thought he was in trouble. When Richard Monroe stepped forward and said, "You saved my daughter," Mark's knees nearly buckled. He tried to refuse anything offered. "I didn't do it for money," he said. "I'd do it again for anyone." That was the moment Richard realized the true measure of wealth. He didn't just offer Mark money. He offered stability, a home, a future. More importantly, he offered opportunity, education for Ethan, a job for Mark that valued his integrity, and a promise that kindness like his would never be overlooked again. Months later, Mark stood in a park, watching Ethan laugh with Lily, now healthy, now alive. The rain-soaked night felt like a lifetime ago. Lily walked over and hugged him, whispering, "You're my hero." Mark smiled, tears in his eyes, understanding that heroes don't wear suits or have billions, they show up when it matters.